1 month had passed since Yuna confronted her father in the Great Hall of House Thalvine, and the ripples of that day continued to spread throughout the colony and beyond the Galactic Commerce. Council had ruled in favor of the human complaint, issuing formal sanctions against the Valorian Dominion for violations of worker protection treaties. More significantly, the Council had demanded reforms to the caste-based systems that govern Valorian society, threatening further economic penalties if the treatment of disowned individuals did not improve. Baron Suyak Thalvine had been stripped of his colonial authority, his house reduced to a minor player in the political landscape he had once dominated. The other noble families had turned on him like predators sensing weakness, eager to claim pieces of his former influence for themselves. Some whispered that he deserved far worse. But Yuna found that she no longer cared what happened to the man who had been her father. Her life had moved beyond him in every way that mattered. The Terran Trade Consortium had offered her a position as a cultural liaison, recognizing that her knowledge of Valorian society and politics made her uniquely valuable in navigating the complex relationships between human and alien civilizations. She had accepted immediately, seeing in the offer a chance to build something meaningful from the ashes of her former life. Her final day at the cargo depot arrived on a morning like any other. The artificial sunlight of the domed colony filtering through the windows as she packed her few belongings into a travel case. The humans she had worked with for months gathered to see her off, bringing small gifts and warm embraces that would have seemed impossibly intimate to her noble sensibilities just a short time ago. "You will visit us when you return to this sector," Ga said firmly, her tone making clear that this was not a request. "I expect updates on everything you are doing. I promise," Yuna replied, surprised to find tears forming in her eyes. Donghyun handed her a small box containing a piece of candy from Earth, something he had been saving for a special occasion. "For luck," he said simply. She hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of genuine affection that required no marks or titles to validate. Minjun waited until the others had said their goodbyes before approaching her. He looked different than he had on the day they first met. Or perhaps it was Yuna who had changed enough to see him properly at last. "Are you nervous?" he asked as they walked together toward the transport hub. "A little," Yuna admitted. "The consortium headquarters is very far from here, and I will be working with species I have never encountered before." "You will be fine," Minjun said with the quiet confidence she had come to depend on. "You have already proven that you can adapt to anything." They reached the platform where the transport ship waited, its hull gleaming under the artificial lights of the loading bay. Other passengers were already boarding, representatives of various species heading to destinations throughout the sector. Yuna turned to face Minjun, struggling to find words adequate to express everything she felt. "I do not know how to thank you," she said finally. "For everything you did, for everything you taught me." "You do not need to thank me," Minjun replied. "You would have done the same for anyone in your situation." "No," Yuna said, shaking her head. "I would not have. Not before I met you. The person I was when my father disowned me would have walked past someone suffering without a second thought," she continued, "because that was how I was raised, to see worth only in marks and bloodlines. You showed me a different way," she declared. "You showed me that kindness does not require a reason, and that family can be chosen as well as born." Minjun smiled, the same warm expression she had seen countless times over these months. "My grandmother used to say that humans are at their best when they help others become their best too," he said. "I think she would have liked you. I wish I could have met her," Yuna replied. "In a way you have," Minjun answered. "Every lesson she taught me, I passed on to you." The transport announced its final boarding call, and Yuna knew she could delay no longer. She reached out and took Minjun's hands in hers, a gesture that once would have been unthinkable. between a Valorian noble and an off-world worker. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "The galaxy is smaller than it seems," Minjin replied. "Our paths will cross again." "I am certain of it." Yuna released his hands and picked up her travel case, walking toward the transport ramp with steps that felt both heavy and light at the same time. At the entrance, she paused and looked back, seeing Minjin still standing on the platform with his hand raised in farewell. Behind him, she could see the others who had come to see her off, the humans who had given her shelter and purpose and hope. When her own people had abandoned her, she raised her own hand in response, holding the gesture for a long moment before turning and boarding the ship. The interior was clean and functional. Rows of seats arranged for passengers of various species to travel in reasonable comfort. Yuna found a seat near a viewport and settled in, watching as the loading bay doors closed and the transport began its departure sequence. Through the window, she could see the domed colony of Keseth 7 growing smaller. The place where she had been born and raised and disowned and reborn. Somewhere in that shrinking landscape was the estate of House Thalvine, the grand halls where her marks had been displayed and then denounced. But she found that her eyes were drawn instead to the industrial sector, to the modest buildings where humans lived and worked and laughed together. That was where her real life had begun. In a small metal room with a bowl of soup and a stranger who asked for nothing in return, the transport cleared the dome and accelerated into the darkness of space. Leaving the world of her birth behind, Yuna caught her own reflection in the viewport. A face with smooth skin that held no luminescent marks to declare her worth to the universe. Once that absence would have filled her with shame and despair, a visible sign of everything she had lost. But now she saw something different in that reflection, something that had nothing to do with bloodlines or social status. She saw a person who had been tested and had survived, who had learned that true worth comes from the choices we make rather than the circumstances of our birth. She saw someone who had been abandoned by the family that should have protected her and found acceptance among strangers who became something more. She saw a woman who was heading toward a future she had built for herself, carrying lessons taught to her by humans who believed that kindness needed no justification. The stars stretched out before her, countless points of light representing worlds and peoples and possibilities she had never imagined when she lived. Within the walls of her father's estate somewhere out there was the consortium headquarters, where she would begin her new role as a bridge between civilizations. Somewhere out there were challenges and adventures, and perhaps even more. Found family waiting to be discovered, and somewhere behind her was a cargo worker named Minjin Park, the human who had seen a disowned noble lying unconscious in the dirt and had chosen to help her simply because she needed it. Yuna smiled at her reflection and then turned her gaze forward, toward the unknown future that awaited her among the stars. Her marks were gone forever, faded to nothing on skin that looked almost human now, but the light inside her burned brighter than any bioluminescent pattern ever could. A flame kindled by compassion and fed by the simple truth that a human had taught her. Worth is not written on your skin. It is written in your choices, and Yuna Thalvine chosen to be someone worth knowing. The Baron's estate looked exactly as Yuna remembered it. All gleaming towers and elaborate architecture designed to display the wealth and power of House Thalvine to anyone who approached. But as she walked through the main gates with Minjin at her side, the grandeur no longer impressed or intimidated her. She had learned during her months among the humans that the most important things in life could exist in small metal rooms just as easily as in grand palaces. The guards who escorted them through the halls looked at Yuna with expressions of confusion and disgust, their luminescent marks flaring with disapproval at the sight of her faded skin. She walked past them without acknowledgement, keeping her eyes forward and her spine straight. Minjun had insisted on accompanying her despite her protests. arguing that she should not face her father alone. 3 other humans had come as well, including GA and a man named Seojun, who served as the official representative of the Terran Trade Consortium on Keseth 7. They had dressed in their finest clothes, which still looked plain and simple compared to the elaborate costumes of the Valorian nobility. But they carried themselves with a dignity that required no external decoration. Baron Suyak awaited them in the great hall, where Yuna had been publicly disowned. Surrounded by advisors and guards who watched the approaching group with barely concealed contempt, her father had aged in the months since she had last seen him, his marks seeming dimmer somehow despite their continued presence, his face drawn with the stress of his collapsing political fortunes. "You came," the Baron said as Yuna stopped before the raised platform where he sat. "I was not certain you would. Your summons did not leave much room for refusal," Yuna replied, her voice steady and calm in a way that seemed to surprise him. "And you brought your human pets with you," Baron Suyak observed with a dismissive wave of his hand. "How touching. These are my colleagues and friends," Yuna corrected. "They are here as witnesses." The Baron's eyes narrowed at her tone, clearly unused to hearing anything but submission from his former daughter. "Very well," he said. "Let us discuss the reason I summoned you." He rose from his seat and descended the steps until he stood directly before her, close enough that she could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "The situation has changed since your departure," he continued. "Circumstances have made it necessary for us to reconsider your status." "My status?" Yuna repeated. "You mean the fact that you publicly disowned me and stripped me of everything I had." "That was perhaps hasty," the Baron admitted, though his tone suggested the words caused him physical pain to speak. "Certain adjustments could be made." "What kind of adjustments?" Yuna asked. "A quiet arrangement with a Meyer house," Baron Suyak explained. "A marriage that would remove you from public attention while providing political benefits to our family." "Your family," Yuna corrected. "You made very clear that I am no longer part of it." The Baron's marks flared with irritation, but he controlled his expression with visible effort. "Blood is blood," he said. Regardless of what words were spoken in the heat of the moment, Minjun stepped forward then, placing himself beside Yuna in a position that the Valorians clearly found inappropriate. "May I speak?" he asked. Baron Suyak looked at the human as one might look at an insect that had crawled onto the dinner table. "Who are you to interrupt a conversation between members of a noble house?" he demanded. "My name is Minjun Park," he replied, "and I am here to represent the interests of the Terran Trade Consortium and its workers on this colony. Humans have no standing in Valorian family matters," one of the Baron's advisors declared. "Perhaps not," Minjun agreed. "But we do have standing in matters of treaty compliance and worker protection." He reached into his jacket and produced a data tablet, holding it up so the Baron could see the screen. "This contains documentation of every threat made against human workers in connection with your daughter's case," Minjun continued, "including your recent summons that explicitly tied her compliance to our operating permits. Those permits are subject to colonial authority," Baron Suyak said dismissively, "an authority that answers to the Galactic Commerce Council." Seon added, stepping forward to stand with Minjun. "The same council that oversees trade agreements throughout this sector of space." The Baron's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of uncertainty appearing beneath his arrogant mask. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "We're not suggesting anything," Minjun replied. "We are informing you that the consortium has already filed a formal complaint with the Council regarding your treatment of human workers. This complaint includes detailed evidence of how you have attempted to use economic coercion to reclaim a person who sought refuge among us." GA added, "A person you yourself declared no longer belonged to your house," Minjun continued. "Which means your current demands have no legal or moral foundation," Baron So Yeok's marks dimmed as the implications of their words settled over him. "You would not dare," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We have already dared," Seojin replied. "The complaint is filed and the council is reviewing it as we speak. Furthermore," Minjin added, "the documentation includes records of your public disownment of your daughter, your decree forbidding anyone from helping her, and your complete abandonment of parental responsibility. The council takes a dim view of societies that treat family members as disposable property," Jihei observed. "It tends to complicate trade negotiations." The Baron looked around at his advisors, seeking support or guidance, but found only worried expressions and averted eyes. His political situation had been fragile before this confrontation, and now it was balanced on the edge of complete collapse. "What do you want?" he asked finally, the words coming out as barely more than a whisper. Yuna stepped forward, placing herself directly before the father who had thrown her away. "I want nothing from you," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Not your name or your title or your approval. You gave up the right to offer me anything when you turned your back on me in front of everyone who ever respected your house." Baron Suyok stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, his expression shifting between anger and something that might have been regret. "Then why are you here?" he asked. "Because I wanted you to see what I have become," Yuna replied. "I wanted you to know that your cruelty did not destroy me." She gestured toward the humans standing beside her. "These people showed me kindness when my own blood abandoned me," she continued. "They taught me that worth is not something you are born with. It is something you build through your actions. I have built something real during these months," she declared. "Something that does not depend on glowing marks or political alliances or the approval of people who never truly cared about me. And I came here today to tell you that I forgive you," Yuna concluded. "Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger would only poison the life I am building for myself." The great hall fell silent as her words echoed off the polished walls. The assembled Valorians staring at this woman who had once been one of them but had become something entirely different. Baron Suyok opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. Yuna turned and walked toward the exit, her human friends falling into step beside her without hesitation. Behind them, the Baron remained frozen in place, watching his disowned daughter leave his house for the second and final time. But this time, she left with her head held high, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was rather than what she had been born with. And somehow that made all the difference. 3 months had passed since Yuna first collapsed outside the human cargo depot. And in that time, she had become someone she barely recognized. Her bioluminescent marks had faded to nearly nothing, leaving her skin smooth and plain like the human she now lived among. But where once this loss would have devastated her, she now found that it mattered less with each passing day. She had discovered something unexpected in her exile, something that no Valorian education had ever taught her. She had discovered her own capability. The depot supervisor, GA, had promoted her twice after recognizing her talent for logistics and organization. And Yuna now managed an entire section of the inventory system that kept the mining colony supplied with essential materials. Workers came to her with problems, and she solved them, not because of who her father was or what mark she bore, but because she had proven herself through effort and dedication. "You have a gift for this work," GA told her one afternoon as they reviewed the quarterly reports together. "I have been doing this job for 15 years, and I have never seen anyone learn so quickly." Yuna felt warmth spread through her chest at the compliment, a different kind of warmth than the cold pride she had been taught to feel as a noble. This was earned, not inherited, and somehow that made it more valuable. The human workers had become more than colleagues to her during these months. They'd become friends. inviting her to their gatherings and celebrations, teaching her about their customs and traditions, sharing their stories, and listening to hers. Minjin had introduced her to a concept she found difficult to understand at first. Something he called found family. Blood means a lot where I come from too, he explained one evening as they walked through the industrial district after work. But we also believe that the family you choose can be just as important as the family you are born into. How can that be? Yuna asked, still struggling with the idea. Family is determined by genetics and lineage, not by choice. Maybe for Valorians, Minjin replied. But humans have always understood that love and loyalty are not limited by biology. He pointed to the group of workers heading into a communal eating hall ahead of them. See GA over there? He said. Her parents are back on Earth, and she has not seen them in 7 years. But the people she works with have become her family out here, and the man beside her. Donghyun, he lost his brother in a mining accident 2 years ago. But the crew took him in, and now they celebrate his birthday and check on him when he is sick. Yuna watched the workers laughing and talking as they entered the hall. Their easy affection for each other visible in every gesture and smile. You can have that too, Minjin said gently, if you allow yourself to accept it. That night, Yuna lay awake in the small room she now had to herself, thinking about everything she had lost and everything she had gained. Her father had taken her name and her title and her inheritance, had stripped away everything that Valorian society said should define her worth. But in the ashes of that destruction, something new had grown. She had friends who cared about her without expecting anything in return. She had work that challenged her and made her feel useful. She had a place in a community that accepted her, not despite her flaws, but without even considering them relevant. Perhaps this was what Minjun meant by found family. Perhaps this was what it felt like to belong somewhere by choice, rather than by accident of birth. The news from the upper districts arrived 2 weeks later, carried by whispers and rumors that filtered down through the social layers of the colony. Baron Sugyok Thalvin's political ambitions had crumbled. His carefully planned alliance with House Moralvine destroyed by the very scandal he had tried to bury. Word had spread among the noble houses that the Baron had produced a daughter with fading mark syndrome, a sign of impure bloodline that made his house unsuitable for marriage alliances with families of higher standing. The rival house had withdrawn from negotiations, publicly citing concerns about genetic contamination, and other houses had followed their lead in distancing themselves from the disgraced Baron. Your father's reputation is ruined, GA told Yuna when the news reached the depot. Some say he may lose his title entirely. Yuna felt a complex mix of emotions at this information, something between satisfaction and sadness that she could not quite untangle. He brought this upon himself, she said finally. His cruelty was his own choice. 3 days after this news arrived, a formal messenger appeared at the human workers' quarter. He carried an official summons bearing the seal of House Thalvin, demanding that Yuna return to the estate immediately to discuss a matter of urgent family importance. He wants me back, Yuna said as she read the document, her hands trembling slightly, not as his daughter but as a tool to save his reputation. How do you know? Minjin asked. Because I know my father, Yuna replied. He would never admit he was wrong. But he is not above using me if it serves his purposes. The summons included a thinly veiled threat, mentioning that the human workers' permits to operate on Keseth 7 were subject to review by the colonial authority that Baron Sugyok still partially controlled. He is threatening you to get to me, Yuna said, her voice heavy with guilt. If I do not comply, he will make all of you suffer. Minjun read the document and then set it down on the table with a calm expression. Let me worry about that, he said. You cannot fight him, Yuna protested. He has power and resources that you cannot match. Maybe, Minjin agreed. But humans have been dealing with powerful people who underestimate us for our entire history. He gathered the other workers together that evening and explained the situation, laying out the threat and the possible consequences for everyone who had helped Yuna during her exile. Yuna expected fear or anger, or perhaps demands that she leave before she caused more trouble. Instead, she watched as the humans discussed the problem with the same practical approach they brought to every challenge in their work. "We are not handing her over," GA declared firmly. "That is not negotiable." "Agreed," said Dongyun. "But we need a plan that protects everyone. The Baron thinks we are just workers with no connections or influence," Minjun observed. "He does not understand how human organizations operate." "What do you mean?" Yuna asked. Minjun smiled in a way that made her realize there was much about humans she still did not understand. "Our cargo operation is not independent," he explained. "We are part of the Terran Trade Consortium, which has agreements with the Galactic Commerce Council. The Baron cannot simply expel us without consequences," GA added. "Doing so would violate treaties that protect human workers throughout this sector of space. But more importantly," Minjun continued, "the consortium has been documenting everything that happens to its workers on Valorian colonies." "Everything?" Yuna repeated. "Everything," Minjun confirmed, "including how Baron Suyak Thalvine treated his own daughter and how he has threatened human workers for the crime of showing her basic kindness for the first time since receiving the summons." Yuna felt something like hope rising in her chest. "You planned for this?" she asked in amazement. "We prepared for possibilities," Minjun corrected gently. "Humans have learned that documentation and alliances are often more powerful than weapons." He reached across the table and took her hand in a gesture of reassurance. "You are not alone in this fight," he said. "You have not been alone for months, even if you did not realize it." Yuna looked around at the faces of the humans who had become her found family, seeing determination and loyalty in every expression. Her father had thrown her away like garbage, but these strangers from a distant world had picked her up and shown her what true worth looked like. Tomorrow they would face the Baron together, and whatever happened next would be faced the same way together. Yuna opened her eyes to find herself lying on a simple bed in a room smaller than her childhood closet had been. The walls were plain metal panels decorated with colorful images and strange symbols, and the air carried unfamiliar scents that she could not identify. For a moment she thought she was dreaming, but the ache in her body and the hunger in her stomach reminded her that everything she had experienced was painfully real. She sat up slowly and looked around the small space, trying to understand where she was and how she had gotten there. A door opened and a being walked in carrying a tray of food. The same smooth-skinned creature she had glimpsed before losing consciousness. "You are awake," the being said in accented Valorian. "That is good because I was starting to worry about you." Yuna pulled the thin blanket up to her chest instinctively, her body tensing as she prepared for whatever cruelty or demand this stranger might make. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice rough from thirst and disuse. "And what do you want from me?" The being set the tray down on a small table and pulled up a chair, sitting down with movements that seemed calm and unthreatening. "My name is Minjun Park, and I am a human," he said. "I work at the cargo depot where I found you collapsed yesterday morning." Yuna had heard of humans before, but had never actually met one in person. They were considered a minor species in galactic terms, having only recently begun expanding beyond their home system and establishing trade relationships with older civilizations. "Why did you bring me here?" Yuna asked, still watching him with suspicion. "What do you expect in return?" Minjun tilted his head slightly, as if the question confused him. "You were unconscious and alone, and it was cold outside," he said simply. "I brought you here because you needed help. But you do not know me," Yuna protested. "You do not know what I did or why I was cast out. Does it matter?" Minjun asked, pushing the tray of food closer to her. You needed help, and I could provide it, so I did. Yuna stared at the food on the tray, her stomach growling loudly at the sight and smell of it. She wanted to refuse, to maintain some dignity in her fallen state. But hunger won over pride, and she reached for the bowl of warm soup. Minjun watched her eat without speaking, seeming content to let her fill her stomach before asking any questions. When she had finished everything on the tray, he took it away and brought her a cup of water that tasted cleaner than anything she had drunk in the noble estates. "Thank you," Yuna said quietly, the words feeling strange on her tongue, because gratitude had never been something expected from someone of her former station. "You are welcome," Minjun replied with a small smile. "Now you should rest more, because you still look exhausted." Over the following days, Yuna remained in the small quarters that Minjun shared with 2 other human workers who accepted her presence without complaint or curiosity. They asked no questions about her past or her fading marks, treating her with the same casual friendliness they showed each other. It was strange and unsettling at first, this complete absence of judgment or hierarchy. Yuna kept waiting for the moment when they would reveal their true intentions, when they would demand payment or service or something else in exchange for their hospitality. But that moment never came. Instead, Minjun simply offered her food when it was time to eat and space to rest when she needed sleep. He told her about his life on Earth, about the family he had left behind to work among the stars, about the grandmother who had raised him after his parents died in an accident. She always said that you can tell the worth of a person by how they treat those who can offer them nothing in return. Minjun explained one evening as they sat in the small common area of the workers' housing. "That is a strange idea," Yuna admitted. "Among my people, worth is determined by blood and marks, not by actions or choices." Minjun shrugged his shoulders in a gesture that Yuna had learned indicated acceptance or indifference. "Humans do not have marks on our skin to show where we come from," he said. "So we have to prove who we are through what we do instead. But how do others know your value if there is nothing to show them?" Yuna asked, genuinely puzzled by this concept. "They watch and they learn," Minjun replied. "And eventually, they decide for themselves what they think of us." After 2 weeks of recovery, Yuna grew restless with having nothing to do. She asked Minjun if there was any way she could contribute, any work she could perform to repay the kindness he and his fellow humans had shown her. He brought her to the cargo depot the next morning and introduced her to the supervisor, a woman named Ga, who looked Yuna over with sharp but not unkind eyes. "Can you count and organize?" Ga asked bluntly. "Yes," Yuna answered. "I was educated in mathematics and logistics as part of my studies." "Good enough for me," Ga declared. "You start today." The work was simple but steady, involving the tracking and sorting of materials that flowed through the depot on their way to various destinations throughout the colony. Yuna found herself enjoying the routine, the sense of purpose that came with having tasks to complete and problems to solve. The other human workers accepted her without hesitation, including her in their conversations and meals, as if she had always been one of them 1 month after her arrival. A message came from the upper districts. Baron Suyak Thalvine had issued a formal decree forbidding any Valorian citizen from providing assistance or shelter to his disowned daughter. The punishment for disobedience was severe, including loss of status and possible exile. "This does not concern us," Minjun said when Yuna showed him the public announcement. "We are not Valorian citizens, but there could be consequences," Yuna warned him. "My father is powerful and vindictive." Minjun smiled that same calm smile she had come to know so well. "Let him try," he said simply. 3 days later, a Valorian enforcer appeared at the entrance to the human workers' quarter. He was tall and imposing, his marks blazing with the authority of the noble houses, and he demanded to speak with whoever was harboring the disgraced daughter of House Thalvine. Minjun stepped forward to meet him while Yuna watched from inside the depot, her heart's pounding with fear for the human who had shown her nothing but kindness. "You are making a mistake," the enforcer warned, his voice cold and threatening. "Associating with the disowned carries consequences that you cannot imagine." "I appreciate the warning," Minjun replied, his tone polite but firm. "But where I come from, we do not abandon people just because someone powerful tells us to." The enforcer stared at the human for a long moment, clearly unused to being challenged by someone he considered so far. Beneath his station, "This is not over," he said. Finally, before turning and walking away, Minjun watched him go and then returned to the depot where Yuna stood waiting with tears forming in her eyes. "Why do you risk so much for me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You have everything to lose and nothing to gain." Minjun considered the question carefully before answering. "Because you deserve to be treated like a person," he said. "Not a symbol or a mark or a bloodline, just a person who matters." Yuna had never heard words like that before, had never imagined that such a concept could exist among her people. Everyone was defined by what they were born with, by the patterns on their skin and the families they came from. But this human saw something different, something that had nothing to do with marks or status. He saw her, just her, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. The great hall of House Thalvine glowed with the light of 100 noble Valorians, their skin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that marked their bloodlines and status in society. Baron Suyok Thalvine stood at the center of it all, his marks burning bright blue and gold as he welcomed delegates from rival houses to discuss trade agreements and political alliances that would secure his family's power for generations to come. His daughter, Yuna, stood near the back of the hall, trying to stay hidden behind a decorative pillar as she watched the celebrations unfold before her. She pressed her hand against her arm where the luminescent patterns should have been glowing with the same intensity as her father's marks. But instead she saw only a dim flicker that grew weaker with each passing day. The physicians had given her the diagnosis 3 weeks ago, speaking in hushed voices as if the words themselves carried disease-fading mark syndrome, they had called it. A rare genetic condition that caused the bioluminescent patterns of noble Valorians to deteriorate until they vanished completely. In Valorian society, these marks were everything, serving as proof of pure bloodline, indicators of social worth, and the very foundation upon which the entire noble system was built. A Valorian without marks was considered corrupted, tainted, and unworthy of recognition or respect. Yuna had kept her condition hidden for as long as she could, wearing long sleeves and avoiding bright lights that would reveal the dimness of her fading patterns. But secrets in noble houses never stayed buried for long. "Yuna," a cold voice called out, cutting through the music and conversation like a blade through silk. She looked up to find her father staring directly at her from across the hall, his expression unreadable, but his marks flaring with intensity that usually signaled anger. "Come forward," Baron Suyak commanded, and the entire hall fell silent as every noble turned to watch the young woman make her way through the crowd. Yuna's heart pounded in her chest as she walked toward her father, keeping her arms pressed tightly against her sides in a desperate attempt to hide what she knew he had already discovered. When she reached the center of the hall, Baron Suyak grabbed her wrist and lifted her arm for all to see. The gasp that rippled through the assembled nobles felt like a physical blow, and Yuna wanted nothing more than to disappear into the polished stone floor beneath her feet. "My daughter has been hiding something from me," Baron Suyak announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Something that brings shame upon our house and dishonor to our bloodline." "Father, please," Yuna whispered. But he silenced her with a look that held no warmth or mercy. "The marks of House Thalvine have burned bright for 17 generations," the Baron continued, releasing her arm as if the touch itself disgusted him. and I will not allow that legacy to be tainted by corrupted blood. Yuna felt tears forming in her eyes as she watched her father turn his back on her, a gesture that in Valorian culture carried the weight of complete and total rejection. From this moment forward, Yuna Thalvin no longer exists, Baron Suyak declared. She is stripped of her name, her titles, her inheritance, and any claim to this house or its protection. The nobles watched in stunned silence as guards approached Yuna and began removing the jewelry and ornaments that marked her as a member of the ruling family. Her rings were pulled from her fingers, a necklace torn from her throat, and the ceremonial sash that bore the house crest was ripped away and thrown to the floor. You will leave this estate immediately, her father said without turning around, and you will never return. Where am I supposed to go? Yuna asked, her voice breaking as the reality of her situation crashed over her like a wave. That is no longer my concern, Baron Suyak replied. And with those words, he walked away to rejoin his guests as if nothing of importance had happened. The guards escorted Yuna through the halls she had walked her entire life, past the rooms where she had played as a child and studied as a young woman, until they reached the main gates of the estate. They pushed her through the threshold without ceremony or kindness, and the massive doors slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed in her soul. Yuna stood alone in the darkness outside the walls that had been her home, wearing nothing but a simple gown and possessing nothing of value. The night air was cold, and she wrapped her arms around herself as she began walking with no destination in mind. She passed through the upper districts where other noble families resided, but the guards at each gate turned her away the moment they saw her dimming marks. Word of her disgrace had already spread through the elite circles of Kesta 7, and no Valorian of standing would risk their reputation by offering shelter to the disowned daughter of House Thalvin. As the hours passed, Yuna found herself descending through the social layers of the mining colony, moving from the gleaming towers of the nobility to the functional structures of the merchant class and, finally, to the industrial sectors where off-world workers lived and labored. Her feet ached, and her body trembled from exhaustion and hunger as she wandered through streets that grew increasingly unfamiliar. She had never been to this part of the colony before, had never had reason to venture among the workers and aliens who kept the mining operations. Running strange faces passed her by, some curious and others indifferent, but none offered help or even acknowledgement. Finally, as the artificial dawn began to brighten the sky of the domed colony, Yuna's legs gave out beneath her. She collapsed near a large building marked with symbols she did not recognize, her vision blurring as consciousness began to slip away. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a figure approaching, a being with smooth skin that held no luminescent marks at all. Minjin Park had just finished his overnight shift at the cargo depot when he noticed the Valorian woman lying unconscious near the loading bay entrance. His co-workers warned him to keep walking, to avoid getting involved with anything related to the alien nobility and their complicated politics, but Minjin had never been good at walking away from someone who needed help. He knelt beside the woman and checked for signs of life, relieved to find that she was breathing steadily despite her obvious exhaustion. Her clothes were fine but disheveled, and he noticed the faint marks on her skin that seemed barely visible compared to the blazing patterns he had seen on other Valorians. Something had happened to this woman, something that had left her alone and helpless in a part of the colony where her kind never ventured. Minjun made a decision in that moment, the kind of decision that his grandmother back on Earth had always said defined a person's true character. He lifted the unconscious woman carefully in his arms and carried her toward the human workers' quarter, ignoring the stares and whispered warnings of those he passed along the way. Whatever trouble had brought this Valorian to his doorstep, he would deal with it after she had a chance to rest and recover. That was the human way. or at least the way his family had taught him. And Minjin Park was not about to abandon those values just because he was living among the stars.